Baseball fans, you're watching On Deck with Tyler Redmond.
All right, all that said, let's talk spring training, all right? Let's talk the roster, starting with the starting rotation. So this to me is pretty simple. You know where the starting rotation in general is going year to year. This year is no different. Obviously, you got your 1 through 4, Max Fried, Kyle Wright, Spencer Strider, Charlie Morton. Those are definites to me. I don't think there's anybody that would question whether or not those guys were going to be in the starting rotation, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to think otherwise. That number 5 spot, though, I've said all off season, I've even said last year, that number 5 spot is up in the air. It's still up in the air. You got a couple of guys that will be competing, and when I say competing, that term is relative. Those guys are trying to get that spot. Michael Soroka, he goes by Michael now. Colby Allard, Ian Anderson, and Bryce Elder. So here's the deal. Any of those guys can fill that 5th spot. Brian Snitker was asked today about Michael Soroka, whether or not he would be able to fill that 5th spot. Was that the goal? Snit said pretty straight up that's not exactly a goal that they have set in mind. They just want Soroka to be able to pitch in some capacity. They want him to be in the locker room again. Frankly, to be able to pitch at all would be an improvement over the past 2 years. I think we can all agree with that. We all like Soroka. Obviously, it would be quite the story if Michael Soroka was able to come back and be the guy he was. And, of course, we'd be rooting for that here at On Deck. But as much as we'd like Michael Soroka to be in that starting rotation, whether it be the 5th spot or the 2nd spot, we just want him to be on the mound. We want him to do this the right way. Of course, he's had multiple setbacks, even one this year already with his hamstring. We don't want anything getting in the way of his recovery and eventual comeback. That being said, there are other guys that could, potentially be that 5th starter. And that being said, all of them are worth taking a look at. Colby Allard was most recently with Texas. Never really found his way there, never really got the stats that made sense for him to keep getting starts. But he is a Braves product. He came through the Braves minor leagues. They obviously know something that, enough to bring him back in. So I think Colby Allard is somebody to keep an eye on during spring training. If you didn't notice, Colby Allard was the first guy the Braves put on the mound in spring training. So they want to know, they want some questions answered as well. Ian Anderson. Ian Anderson is a guy that we're all very familiar with. He's a guy, he's primarily fastball changeup pitcher, occasionally a curveball. But, he has had a lot of success. He's had a lot of struggles. Last year, he really fell into a struggle period, got sent down to the minors. We never saw him again at the major league level in 2022. That being said, I don't think that's going to be the end of Ian Anderson. I really don't. I think Ian Anderson has already made some people change their mind on him because he's now thrown in a slider to the mix. So it's going to be interesting to see how he develops. And, of course, the last one is Bryce Elder. Bryce Elder is not somebody that I look at for necessarily this year. I look at him more as a future potential guy because I love his stuff. I think he's got all the stuff in the world, but I don't necessarily look to him to be the guy this year. You got a lot of names there. Mike Soroka, Colby Allard, Ian Anderson, Bryce Elder. Look, to me, if all of those guys at the bottom of your screen were just fill-in, I think we'd be fine. Like if you're going with the hot hand and Colby Allard's having, success, you go with him until it doesn't really work out anymore. You go to Soroka, you go to Anderson, you go to Elder. It really doesn't much matter. If those guys can help the team be successful all together in that 5th spot, then I think that's worth taking a chance at. I don't think, a lot of people obviously just want it to be clean cut, 5 pitchers, that's it. It doesn't always work out that way. It's going to be an ever-changing spot, I think. And not to mention if, knock on wood here, if Charlie Morton was to get hurt halfway through the season, you have 3 guys left out of the 5 or 3 guys left out of those bottom 4 that could potentially fill that role. If Mike Soroka was to have a bounce-back year this year and really be, again, the ace of a staff like we know he could be back in the day, then yeah, that'd be great. But I think all 4 of those guys could show success at some point during the 2023 season. So that's where I'm at on the starting pitchers. I do want to say one more thing about it, though. The last video I did, it wasn't a live stream, but it was a video that I did, was about Max Fried and his upcoming free agency. And we've talked a lot about the upcoming free agencies, and I can show you the timetable for when that is. Max Fried is not until around 2025. So that all being said, the current starting pitchers, right, have a lot to do with whether or not Max Fried comes back, right? Charlie Morton is likely not going to be there in a couple of years, right? Max Fried is, again, free agent. Kyle Wright, Spencer Strider will still be around, but if you can get one of those guys at the bottom to be another pitcher that's consistent, and you have a 1-2-3 punch with Kyle Wright, Spencer Strider, and let's just, for example, Mike Soroka, you may not have to pay Fried. But if that's not the case, it very well may be that the Braves feel like they need to pay Fried. So that's just a very under-the-radar thing I want you to keep an eye on, is if any of those young pitchers find success either this year or next, especially over the next 2 years, that is something to keep in mind come Max Fried's eventual free agency. The other thing I want to talk about, the bullpen. Look, the bullpen, assuming you have 8 spots, this is what I think you're looking at. The locks, no doubt about it. Raisel Iglesias, A.J. Minter, Joe Jimenez, Colin McHugh. I don't think anybody will disagree with those 4. The locks, if healthy, to me, Kirby Yates and Nick Anderson. If they're both healthy, they're going to be in there. Other bullpen candidates, you got a lefty battle here. Louis Letke, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but I'm going with Letke. Lucas Letke, and Dylan Lee. Dylan Lee would be my favorite in that competition. You obviously want to have some lefties. They have that advantage. It could be both of them. But for the righties, you have Jackson Stevens, who's a great long reliever. Seth Elledge, Michael Tonkin, Roderick Munoz, and Darius Vines. There's a lot of names there that I have yet to be introduced at the major league level. The ones that I really want you to pay attention to outside of the locks and locks if healthy in the bottom there are Dylan Lee, Jackson Stevens. Those are the guys that, even if they don't make the opening day roster, I think they could eventually come up when needed during the season. Non-roster invitees. This is more so of just a general outlook of what we have right now in spring training. Your right-handed pitchers, Blake Burkhalter, Jesse Chavez, Raul Ramirez, Alan Rangel, Yaxel Rios, Victor Vodnik, and Brooks Wilson. Those are your right-handed guys. Now, full disclosure, I live in Columbus, Georgia. I work for a local news station. Blake Burkhalter is a guy that went to Auburn. He was a reliever for Auburn. I saw him a lot. Not this past year, but I believe the year prior, come the playoffs. You can look it up on Google right now. He had a big moment in the playoffs. He's a guy that personally, every time his name comes up, I can't help but not at least acknowledge that's who that is. He's a guy that I think could come up sooner rather than later. I'm not predicting it. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but he's a guy that doesn't get a lot of attention. He's not going to be the number 1 prospect or anything like that, but he could pitch right now, and I think he'd be all right. Left-handed pitchers, Dylan Dodd, Brian Moran, Jared Schuster, former number 1 pick, another guy to keep your eye on. Danny Young, and of course, infielders, former Atlanta Braves fan favorite, A-Ray Adrianza, also World Series in 2021. Cal Conley, he is the guy who got the 3rd strike called, the automatic strike zone. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Joe Dunand, Adini Hechavarria, another former Brave, Yolmer Sanchez, and Luke Waddell. Outfielders, Justin Dean, Cody Milligan, Kevin Pillar, Magnerius Sierra, and Forrest Wall. Catchers, Drake Baldwin, Ryan Castile, Joe Hudson, and Tyler Tolvey. So a lot of you guys have asked about who would be the 3rd catcher behind Sean Murphy and Travis d'Arnaud. I think, obviously it's probably going to be from that list right there. Outfielders, the real question there is left field. I think the real favorite to keep an eye on there would probably be Kevin Pillar. He's just the biggest name out of that list currently. Infielders, A-Ray and Adini Hechavarria. I mean, those are guys that you know what they produce, you know what they can do, but they got to show out in spring training. Really, the names to keep an eye on from this list, this is the real keep an eye on these guys list, is Blake Burkhalter, Jesse Chavez, I would say, Victor Vodnik, Jared Schuster, A-Ray, Adini Hechavarria, Kevin Pillar. That's who I would keep an eye on for guys that could potentially make the roster, if not opening day, later on in the season. And of course, lastly, position players. Now, these are what you're looking at for position players. Matt Olson, Ozzie Albies. At shortstop, Vaughn Grissom and Orlando Arcia. Those guys are competing. Third base, no doubt, Austin Riley. Catcher, Sean Murphy and Travis d'Arnaud in that order. Right field, Ronald Acuna. And center fielder, Michael Harris II. In left field, that's the biggest question mark to me on the field right now. Not so much worried about shortstop. Left field is the one that I'm worried about the production. You got Eddie Rosario, who, of course, battled vision issues last year. And, of course, you have Marcell Ozuna, who has battled a number of issues over the past couple of years. So, that being said, there's a lot there that could be fixed come spring training. I mean, here's the deal. These guys are competing to make it back. The Braves have said numerous times over the past few days that Eddie Rosario is trying to get back into Eddie Rosario form, the form that we saw in the NLCS a few years ago. And honestly, if Eddie Rosario, and I really want to focus on Eddie Rosario for a second, if Eddie Rosario can be half the player he was in 2021, then it'd be an improvement. I was a big proponent in getting Eddie Rosario back to the Braves when he hit free agency after the World Series season because, for number one, he's a left-handed bat. The Braves really lacked that at the time, and he was a guy that got on base. And we didn't see a ton of that last year. We saw an improvement in the second half of the season relatively, but it was just a really tough year for Eddie Rosario. He's had a full offseason to obviously recuperate from the vision issues, the eye surgery that he had. I think Eddie Rosario could very well turn it around this year and be the guy that he was meant to be when he signed that 2-year deal. But, only time will tell. When it comes to Ozuna, there's a lot there to talk about. When it comes to Ozuna, a few weeks ago, Alex Anthopoulos was asked if Ozuna would make the opening day roster. And he said, ask me on opening day. So there's a lot there for Ozuna to look forward to try to I guess show that he deserves to play, and his deal wasn't one that fell through. But spring training is that time to show that. So this is the time to watch. We will, of course, wait and see. That's really all we can do with the Ozuna situation. If you're asking me how I feel about everything, when it comes to the position players, Vaughn Grissom, Orlando Arcia is a legit competition. I don't view that as one has a advantage over the other. What I do, or what I do view it as, is this. I think Orlando Arcia, for one, you know the player he is. You know what he can be. You know the fullest potential he has because he's had years in the league. And that is a guy that you can fall back on. I think the end goal is Vaughn Grissom. Now, some people may disagree with that. If Orlando Arcia is your favorite player, I understand. I'm not saying Orlando Arcia doesn't have a chance here. I actually think he very well does. But Vaughn Grissom is the guy that the Braves are trying to make work. I really believe that. I think that, and look, they'll let anybody let anybody play that's playing well. But Vaughn Grissom is the guy that makes sense. He's the younger guy that's more years of control, and odds are he has more potential than Orlando Arcia. He's barely had enough time in the league to really get a gauge on who he is as a player, but that doesn't mean that he is not ready. We've seen Michael Harris come up. He's an outstanding major league player, and he did not have any time in AAA. But not everybody is Michael Harris. So what I think could happen, there's a number of things that could happen, but what I think could happen is the year starts off with Orlando Arcia. He may even play to the end of the year, have Vaughn Grissom spend time in AAA. It's not like we have Vaughn Grissom on a huge Michael Harris deal where it doesn't make sense to put him in AAA. He's still on that same contract. So I think that could happen. It could be that Vaughn Grissom shows out in spring training and we never look back. So there's a number of things to analyze and look at. A lot of people are going to talk about Dansby Swanson. You're going to hear that in the media. Well, Dansby's gone. What are the Braves going to do? The Braves have options. If they didn't, I believe they probably would have made a stronger push for Dansby. Not to say they didn't do enough, but I'm just saying if they did not have the options, they probably would have forked out the money a little bit more willingly than they did. And I think Vaughn Grissom is the primary option there long term. Orlando Arcia could be a short-term operation as well. So that is the roster. That is my breakdown of the spring training current roster, what you can look at, the storylines, that kind of thing. Biggest things to look at on field wise would be left field, shortstop, obviously. In the bullpen, you got, that's going to shake out how it's going to shake out. Starting rotation is a very interesting situation, though. That fifth spot to see who's going to go up and grab the brass ring, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting.
Baseball fans, make sure you like and share this video and subscribe to this channel. As always, thank you for your support.